we started trying to figure out, all right, how does behavioral science fit into product development? How does it fit into Agile? Learned a ton about A/B testing, and we learned a lot about different techniques. In fact, I think some of the cool stuff that happened there was that, Steve was working very closely with some of our marketing team, and oftentimes what happened was that the learnings that they had on A/B testing emails, for example, made their way into the product, because we would talk on a regular basis, and then kind of vice versa. We would sometimes come up with concepts on the product side. They would come validate them in the email side, and then we would bring them back into the product development side. So we had some more confidence as we were spending a lot more time and energy on the product side, pulling actual engineers and testing things and making sure that everything looked right, and spending way more time than it takes to generate an email to get a quick signal. And so about a year after I joined Hello Wallet, Morningstar, which is one of our investors, bought us. And actually both Steve and I moved to Chicago at that point to join Morningstar. I started working on a couple of robo-advisor platforms, and Steve took over and grew his behavioral science team to span all of everything that Hello Wallet was working on, and then everything that Morningstar does, which is related to helping people pick the right investments to reach their long-term financial goals. So we worked with advisors, we worked with asset managers, and then we worked with consumers as well as kind of the big three segments. But then in Chicago, I learned that it was also really cold, and so in the fall, we moved back to Austin, and since then I've just been advising mostly startups around product strategy, design, and process stuff. So it's a little bit about what brought me here. All right, now I'm going to start talking a little bit about Create. So as I mentioned, Hello Wallet is like it was web and mobile apps that help people reach their financial goals. And we sold to employers, and actually that was new. When I first joined, they used to have a straight-to-consumer model. They were transitioning to this world where they found that employers actually were very interested in improving the financial wellness of their employees. And one thing in particular that employers were interested in was improving retirement readiness. And the reason for that, there's a couple. One, older workers are very expensive for medical insurance, and so the biggest expense at most companies right now is actually the healthcare plan. And so there's often, the CFO was very interested in trying to figure out how to reduce those costs. And so if folks weren't retiring, then those costs would stay high. The other thing that happens when the executives at the top of the org chart are not retiring is that there's no career sort of opportunities for the folks below them, right? So then what happens? You lose a bunch of talent because they're like, I don't know when I'm going to get promoted to that role that is not making yet. And so when I joined, Hello Wallet had a concept around whether you were ready for retirement, but it was pretty lightweight. And so we spent, I think, pretty much a year building out a set of features to help people plan their retirement out. And it was good stuff. It was like, hey, tell us when you think you're going to retire. We'll project how much income you're going to have. We'll tell you how much we think you're going to get from Social Security. Oh, you have a pension. Tell us about it. And Hello Wallet actually aggregates all your bank accounts. So we already knew what IRAs and 401ks you had, and you could tell us which ones you wanted to include in your retirement planning. You could tell us about how much money you were contributing to those that we factored into your projections. We knew where you worked, so we knew what your match policy was. So if we knew that you were going to get 50 cents on the dollar for the first 7% that you contributed, that would be factored into the projection. So we spent a lot of time building this feature set that we called retirement guidance. And what happened was we didn't get very many people using it. And so I went to Steve and I said, Steve, can you help us? And at that point, it was one of the kind of early in the behavioral science and product development, so we're still kind of sussing out the interactions of how they should be kind of folded into the Agile process. And so Steve said, sure. And so he said, all right, tell me a little bit about what you're trying to accomplish. And for you sort of information architecture buffs out there, you may notice that the page I'm talking about is actually 2 clicks deep. So it's on the guidance navigation tab, and then it's also on the retirement guidance page. It's not the settings in depth, that's the default. So I'm talking about something that was 2 clicks in, and that was part of the problem that Steve pointed out to us. It's like, how do people know that this existed? And so we did a couple of things kind of working with Steve, and some of these are going to sound basic and some of them are not. So one of the first things we did was, perhaps not surprising, we crafted an email and we said, hey, we spent a year building this cool thing, why don't you come try it out? And the call to action, which I actually cut off accidentally, was a button that took you straight to that page. So you avoided the clicks of having to worry about whether someone knew how to get there once they logged in. Now the second one was something that I would say is a little bit more of an application of the Create framework. So here, this is not new stuff, but it is something that I feel like I've seen product teams over and over again forget, which is sort of discoverability, right? You work on something, and it's a feature that maybe not everyone would see as soon as they like log into your app or come onto your site. How do you tell them that it exists, especially when you're changing the product every 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever, right? So the C in the Create framework, which we'll get into in a minute, I actually think is one of the most overlooked ones, and is one of my key takeaways from the framework itself. And then so there's another thing that we did, and so a little bit more background on Hello Wallet. One of the kind of things that made Hello Wallet unique when it comes to your finances, which are often messy and confusing and complicated, is we summarize your entire financial wellness into a 100-point scale. And so we had this thing called the financial wellness score, and it was broken out into 8 components. It was things like, are you spending less than you earn? Do you have enough emergency savings? Is your debt to income ratio at an appropriate level? Do you have the right life insurance? Do you have disability insurance? If you had a house, do you have the right home equity ratio? And one of them was actually retirement. And so we sort of projected how much money we thought you were going to have, and then we compared it to what we thought you should have, or a goal that you set yourself. And so there's a component of this score page where you can drill down into the details that explain to you how you're doing with your retirement. And one of the changes we ended up making, which is maybe hard to see here, was that big blue button in the bottom right corner, which was when you went in there and said, wait a minute, this score looks bad, let me see how they calculated this and find out what I need to do to improve it, that there was immediately a call to action that says, if you are not sure what to do to get your retirement on track, here's the button, and then we took straight people there to the Good Retirement Guidance feature. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about how this applied the Create framework, but just a couple of examples where this was kind of became apparent to me. And just for some extra context, I think Steve published his book maybe 6 months after I joined Hello Wallet. So like one of my first things I did when I got there was he gave me a draft of it, and I started looking over it. So some of these concepts hadn't yet been ingrained in our process at Hello Wallet, which is why there was a moment where we were like, Steve, what should we do here? Things were definitely changed after that because we started figuring out how to fold behavioral design into the actual product development process, which is probably a whole other talk. But I can answer questions on it if you guys have any. All right, so that was a little bit about sort of my first introduction to the Create framework. But I'm going to talk now a little bit more about the framework itself. But before I do that, I want to provide some context. So Steve wrote this book, Designing for Behavior Change, a few years ago. And it was great. It was actually like a combination of a bunch of books that had come out about behavioral science that were a little bit more, actually, it was books like Thinking Fast and Slow and Blink and Nudge and those types of books. But none of them had applied some of these concepts to software development. And so Steve's book was the first that did that. And so the Create framework is actually within the broader context of how do you design software for behavior change. And so he has sort of 4 phases to designing for behavior change. The first is understand. And actually, I'm gonna look at these real quick because I don't remember all the dots myself. I would call this one a little bit on sort of like just the educational side of things, which is like, do you understand how the mind works, and have you thought about how people are going to react to whatever you put in front of them? Then there's the discover phase, and so, I'm going to go a little bit deeper on understand. So this is about how we make decisions, which is where the Create framework is very helpful. And then he also talks a little bit about strategies for behavior change. So Steve has 3 strategies that he talks about. And I'm going to talk about one of them only, and the Create framework really is best used for that one. One strategy is habits, which is that the decision-making process is automatic. You don't even realize it's happening. So I equate this to like every morning you wake up and you brush your teeth and you drink coffee, or vice versa maybe. But you're not thinking much about that decision, right? Yet every day you're doing the exact same thing. Habits are really hard to build, so I'm going to say that it's probably a whole other talk. The next is what Steve calls cheating. And this is where you take the action on behalf of the person or the user, obviously ideally with their consent. The best example of this, I came out of the retirement industry, is defaulting people into their 401k. So, when 401ks first started, when you joined a company, and some of you might have done this, you had to fill out a piece of paper that said, yeah, I want to participate in the retirement plan, and I want to contribute this much money out of every paycheck, and I want to invest in these choices. Well, those 3 things in and of themselves are like these, like 6 hours of thinking and research and like a process, And so what they found was that very few people were participating in their retirement plans, and if you've seen any articles about the state of retirement in America, like it's not surprising, right? And so what the retirement industry and a lot of employers actually chose to do is they default everyone, new employees, into the retirement plan. So they just say, look, you're going to be 6%, you're going to go into this target date fund unless you opt out of it. And with that, I think it was like a 30 to 40% increase in the number of people who are participating in retirement plans. And don't worry, there's a lot of regulation that goes into how they make those decisions and default people into certain things. But so those are some examples of the understand, which is just, do you understand how people are making choices and how they behave? So the next one is around deciding what actions you want someone to take. And so here it's a little bit around, sorry, by the way, I see a bunch of people taking notes. We will share the deck afterwards too. I think I'll work with Alan and figure out how to make sure that you guys have a copy of this. And there's actually a workbook that Steve sent me that I'll share as well. But what's the outcome, who's the person, and like what's the action that you want them to take? And like part of this part here is actually understanding the environment, which is where some of the qualitative research becomes very relevant, which is observing people. Like, are they on their phone at the bus stop, or are they on their couch with an iPad? Like, those types of things matter at this moment. And then there's the design phase, and so this one's broken out a little bit into sort of a couple things. The most relevant one probably is, that for most people here, is the interface design. So the parts of this is like a behavioral plan, what are all the user stories, and this gets into a little bit of Agile, like how you break all the work up and think about the flow of the workflow, and the interface designs, and then the product itself. You think this a little bit as a product strategy question. But this third spot, design, is probably where the create framework comes back into play. So in understand, it might just be high level of like, have you grasped some of the foundational concepts of how the mind works and how people evaluate and decide whether to take an action that you ask them to take? And then this part, it gets a little more tactical, which is like, what are people thinking when you show them this word or this email subject or this button on this page? And so the create framework applies here too. And when we get into the exercise, you'll see this. And then there's a refine, and so this is the part of designing for behavior change that Steve talks a little bit about A/B testing and how you start measuring and how you go back. And you'll note this framework is actually a little bit of a spiral, and the intent is actually that you kind of do these things in a loop. So you might learn something, and then you might go back out there and try to understand why it happened, and then it's either qualitative or quantitative. So that is a little bit of background about the framework itself. And now, without further ado, I'm going to talk to you about the framework. It is a funnel, as Steve calls it. It starts at the top. And so it starts with the cue, which is the moment that you are prompting someone to take the action that you want them to take, and hopefully that they want to take as well. And it goes down into the reaction. And so this is effectively, if you've read Blink by Malcolm Gladwell, it is the snap decision that people make. Some of their emotional gut responses, it happens in less than a second. What their first reaction is to your cue, and that might be the email subject, it might be the action itself, it might be a lot of things. But some people will fall out because they don't notice the cue, or they don't react well to it, right? The next one is the evaluation step, and so this is around cost benefit, and so this is where the reaction kind of step in the funnel is a little bit of what, if you've read Think, Eat Fast or Slow, but psychologists call it System 1. So it's like your gut reaction. The way that the brain works is there's initial gut reaction, and then there's a little bit more of a conscious reaction that's happening, and that's this reaction step here, and it's evaluating the costs versus the benefits. And then it moves on to the ability check. So this is, even if I got your cue and I didn't have a negative response to it, and I think that maybe taking this action would be beneficial to me, do I have the ability at this point in time to actually take that action? Do I know what I need to do? Do I have all the materials I need? Do I, whatever, do I need to go get my bank account statement or whatever, all those things, right? And I'll talk a little bit more about examples about each of these in a minute. And then finally, there's sort of the time pressure, which is this urgent for me? Like, do I have to do this now? If so, why? Or can I blow this off and come back and do this later? So this might be like, okay, I'm just going to leave this email unread and I'll look at that tonight, right? And then finally, the last step is the experience itself, or the kind of, I feel like at one point he actually had this called execute, but This is around when you actually take the action, and this step is actually very important because guess what? It actually informs the gut reaction the next time around. So, like, I'm going to use a very extreme example. If someone rang my doorbell and I opened the door and someone threw like a whipped cream pie in my face, like the next time my doorbell rings, I might think twice about whether I want to go out there and open it, right? This was actually a very important part of the funnel because it actually influences the next time there's a cue and a prompt. All right, so I'm going to go through an example or like a couple of just like each of these things. So on the queue, perhaps one of the most common that you would know are push notifications on your phone, right? So mobile app is trying to tell you something, and probably they're trying to get you to do something at that moment. Your email inbox, I think, is another really great channel that you might see. Finally, TV is oftentimes a good cue. Even if you just saw this commercial, it might get you thinking about the beach and the summer coming up, and maybe you want to work out and get your beach body ready or not, whatever. And so, these are just some examples. There's plenty of more cues. You might be driving by a bank and remember that you need to go get some cash at some point soon, or you might walk by, a gym where a bunch of people are running on the treadmill and be like, oh yeah, I probably need to think about working out, right? So these come in a lot of different flavors and through a lot of different channels, and we're exposed to them constantly throughout the day. The next is the reaction. So if Netflix sent me an email saying, hey, we have this cool new show for you, I might have a very positive reaction to that. I might get excited about it, I might be happy. And then on the flip side, if I come around and just ask you to start thinking about retirement planning, like you might have a different reaction, which is like, no, that's not urgent. I'm 25. I don't even care about that right now, right? So, these take different flavors, but these are the gut reactions, the things that just the way that people think about sort of immediately when the cue prompt shows up. Then there's the evaluation. As I mentioned, this one's a little bit more calculated. It's really the cost versus the benefit. Now, this is not necessarily like how much money is it going to cost me, right? It could be just effort, like how much is this hard, is it easy? It could be amount of time. Is this going to be like a 15-minute thing? Or are you asking me to contribute, like, do I think this is going to be like a 3-hour commitment on my end? And on the benefit side, there's a bunch of different ways that people will evaluate what the benefit is, right? Some of them might be financial, but mostly it's going to be probably emotional and things like that, right? How am I going to feel afterwards, and what do I get in return, and is that going to make me feel good or what? So this is the moment when there's a very rational sort of decision-making process that's happening. And it's funny, it's like I think a lot of people would assume that this is perhaps one of the first things that happens, but it's not, right? You had to get through two steps to get here. And actually, I'm going to back up here. I forgot to say one thing about the funnel, which is, you should think about this as the same way that you might optimize any sort of funnel on our marketing side, adoption, email campaigns, or whatever. But even if you assume that 2/3 of people got through all of these 5 steps, you're already down to like a 14% of all the people who got the cues. So it's like actually really important. And Steve will talk about it in his book, but the key reason that the framework exists is that it's intended to help you identify where do I think people are dropping off in the funnel, because if you know that, then the tactics on how to kind of get more people through become much easier. But if you only know that 100 people got the email and 1 person clicked on it, like you have a lot of guesses, or you're just gonna be kind of guessing wildly about what to do about it. All right, so we talked about the cues, some thoughts on the evaluation. The next one is ability, and so Steve actually really loves to use the running example in his, he has a running app as his example. So I use the shoe here, right, which is like, even if you got a message saying, man, you should go for a run right now, if you look down and you don't have running shoes, like you probably would say, I can't really go for a run right now, right? Or I don't have like shorts and like something I could sweat in, right? It's not I can't do that right now. And there's plenty of other examples of these types of things. Actually, this was funny. One of the ones was at Hello Wallet, Steve actually found that people didn't know how to find the button to log back to actually enter their credentials, because our main call to action was like sign up for Hello Wallet. And so we actually found that a lot of people, we had kind of buried the sign-in link too deep, and so a lot of people, Steve pointed out to us, we were losing in the funnel because they didn't know how to even log into our product, and so we fixed that. But just another example. And then the time pressure. So there's a lot of times there's a lot of stuff going on in people's lives, and you might have noticed on one side of the funnel that there was every step had this thing called distraction, where people are just falling out because they have a million other things going on in their life at the moment that thing came into their email inbox or the push notification came or whatever. And here's just some examples of those distractions, right? You might have a kid who's crying, like, you can't do that thing right now. For the mobile use case, right, the bus is coming and like I gotta go find my bus pass, and so I'm gonna put my phone back in my pocket, and guess what, I'm gonna forget about that email that you sent me or that push notification. There's also some tactics around creating a sense of urgency. So I don't know if these screenshots are too small. This is an Amazon daily deal, right? But it's going to end in 10 hours. So like, if you don't take advantage of this deal in 10 hours, like you're done, it's gone. And so they've created a little bit of urgency. Groupon was the same way with this. And then the last step was the experience. And so as I mentioned, this could be like, hey, that was awesome. I had a really good experience, and so therefore I'm probably way more likely to take the action the next time the next queue props up. Or it might be what I imagine happens on January 2nd every year, which is that people went to the gym on the 1st and they like worked out for an hour and a half for the first time in 2 years. And then the next day they're just like, I'm way too sore to do anything, I will never work out again. And then they just lost that behavior. So that was the framework and kind of the high-level stuff. I'm going to stop there before we get into sort of the activity and just see if anyone had like any high-level questions or thoughts about what I've talked about so far. Yeah?
What was the name of the book again?
It is called Designing for Behavior Change. I have a link to it at the back of at the end of the deck, and like I said, I'll send it out. And it's by Steve Wendell. He's written 2 books actually. The other one's very specific to engaging employees through benefit programs, but it applies some of the same concepts.
Do cues wear off?
Yeah, so the question was, do cues wear off? They could, and this is where, so I think yes, they do, and the reason they would start wearing off is if the experience is bad, right? They took the cue the first time around, and then they didn't like what happened, and so the next time around, it'll wear off. And this is why creating habits is actually very hard to do. So to get someone to log into your web app every day, like, right, Facebook has done this for me at least, right? At some point in the day, I don't know what it is, but I'll log into the app and just see what's going on. But they can wear off for sure. Yeah,
in your experience, does making something easier to do actually help with behavior change, or is there like, what about effort justification, like getting people to put in a lot of effort to make a change? Because I read mixed things.
Yeah, so the question was around, does making things easier to always result in sort of longer-term behavior change? So honestly, I think the answer kind of depends on the context, right? There's probably that one school of thought that says if people have to work hard for something, they might feel more proud of it at the end. And when they think about the experience, they'll be really proud of themselves. But for a lot of things, I think especially in the digital world, making it easier is probably better because if you told me I had to run around the block 8 times and then hop on one foot 20 times and then like go solve a puzzle or something before I could log into your portal, probably not going to do it.
Basically, if you can get them through it, then something harder might be more advantageous in the future. But the problem most of the time is you can't get them through it. So you got most of the time the things we're facing is easier, is better. But
Any other questions?
we'll take a break while he's here.
Yeah, I'll open it up again at the end too, so if you haven't thought of anything yet, I'm sure you will, especially after the exercise. So what I was thinking now is actually, because this is how I learned the Create framework, and it was very helpful because Steve made us do it on our product when he came and told us about it. So what I was thinking is probably like maybe break out into groups of 4 or 5 or so. I've got a worksheet, and I think what you could do is basically think about, for whatever you're working on right now, and maybe just vote on one idea or product that you want to work on as a group, and think about what is the action that I wish people were taking. And I have a little worksheet here that actually has like the C, the R, the E, the A, the T, the E, and for each one you can talk about sort of what is the current experience, how do you think people might be responding to it, and then you can kind of brainstorm different alternatives. Actually, I have it. I think probably like maybe 20 minutes or so. So I'd say the first thing is find groups of 3, or sorry, maybe 4 or 5 6 is okay too. It's probably easiest to just be near you unless there's someone you really know that you want to work with. And feel free to rearrange the chairs. And then I'd say the second thing is just like pick one person's product or challenge that they're currently facing, and then brainstorm that together. So I'm going to pass the worksheet around, and then I think I'll have some panels as well, so we can start using that. I'll type it up on the screen.
You also have I think you're doing fine. Y'all are on it.
So who is your audience that you would want to Is any particular problem? Like large that's grouping 20 minutes. Just like getting stuff. Just like yes, one of those projects that I'm always using is out there, come in, make it and then
like say one live
I'm at in the same district. So the current status is actually there's no incentive for them to buy any.
it doesn't have like an
Right. And then less than 10 miles away, there's a hospital. So what we do is we want service right
like in Panera, like
stores might be closer,
but
fundamentally the thing we're working on now is services. They have metrics that are the bonus on and are historically metrics. And we want to just we want them to look at that there's no metrics, no prompt to action. Both the metrics, both that's what the metrics provided from the current
right now he's all
corporate metrics and the ones that we surface are so our challenge is getting them to act on
say one letter and two out of
will actually help them. There's no so I guess I can go on.
would you like save one letter?
Your audience
Like a dialogue
I'll go in the morning, I get
if one's already due.
I can choose to focus on the metrics that I have for the past 5 years, or I can focus on the metrics. So
And then that's happening.
So okay, so I showed you like you're
Yeah,
the thing that I'm thinking is like you're in a relationship, you have people behind you trying to or like there's a lot of people behind you. There's a power the way that
there are metrics that correlate with those metrics, and so on and so forth. Graphs, direction graphs of metrics. What we do is
what would happen if I do this
surface the ones that would be the
But
most
I think they're like saying so much, like, get up and so you have, like,
So, how much beer you have in stock makes a difference in whether it's a Tuesday
it depends
or
on
a
your
Saturday just
yeah.
before a game.
Not only that, but it matters what store you're in. The one that's next to the hospital
Or you can
cares
say
how much beer
something
you
that's
have.
Right.
like instead of a dialogue, you can have something that
When stock beer, as well as the fact that they have 5 sellers.
So you've got a store manager that logs in, they see the same metrics they've always seen. They're not going to get fired if they keep paying attention to those, but they could get some incremental, compensation if they focus on this extra stuff.
Right. And we gotta get them to trust that.
Right. And then you also got to take into account the difference between the guy that's, this is his first day at this store, versus the guy that's been there for 4 years.
Well, I think yours is probably a little bit easier in the sense that, like, there's some intrinsic motivation versus, like, a cold call. Essentially.
evaluation.
So how would they find out about this? Do they get an email notification that
What's the evaluation?
metrics, or it just shows up one day on their dashboard?
What even brings them to the dashboard?
So part of their job is to
$1
first thing in the
off.
morning.
But I spent $5. Or you could be
Shows up on the dashboard. Yes, the corporate dashboard.
I mean, do you know, is that defined yet? How it shows up?
Yeah, I mean, so this is like, since there's no current sample, there's no way to research for it right now. But like I'm putting like a case study like through it.
Elevate it.
What would be the evaluation that you would make at a certain point on a regular
If they're commuting in, right, to the office, right, do they get the opportunity to see it on a mobile device?
That's good.
I think it's like
Right. I think it's necessary.
I think like in the evaluation
Probably not.
Off hours.
what are the
Well, I wasn't really thinking about it either. I was thinking about it as they were, get in before they walk in the door. It's a thought, right? I mean, it's broadening the scope.
One of the things that we hacked about right now, and one of the things we thought about was, what if we had an Alexa sitting in Alexa, what am I
so like say you buy a price, I'm gonna get a copy. Let's say that it's already there's a process to get a copy. What would be your evaluation?
When they're doing that, when they're getting their coffee and sitting down and getting ready.
what is the actual?
So what you want
Like de-evaluation would be the
so people are looking at it, but they're not taking it. So there's no from every metric to create that.
money versus product, like that's
Care
that
about
would be
that actually getting up and
more of a little bit more money versus what I'm getting is
customer success.
So what is it that they created as a search of their dashboard? What is that? Is that just like a to-do item? Okay. So it's just saying like, I'm going to do this.
So they get an action, they get a message, and there's an action associated with it. What's their reaction to it?
Is there an action associated with it?
There can be. So with every metric, you have the option.
At that point, can I pay for it?
So let's say you see something that's red, and you say, damn, I can work on this. You have the option to, in the software at least, say, okay, let me create a little to-do and assign it to somebody. The other option is to get out and go outside or grab the cash.
I don't need it. Then is there only one action or like resolve? Or how long is the reaction?
No,
It's like a really long time. How often do they really listen to that? There's a lot of
Just like if you need to sell more candy at the point of sale, try and do this.
And some of those things might be, for example, the candy thing, right, is when do people need candy? Right? It's like, oh, well, that's in the afternoon, well, it's morning now. So now time pressure is
Okay, so it seems like they're vaguely aware that this stuff exists. They're not clear doing that is going to benefit them, you know,
maybe something else.
right. They may or may not know exactly what exactly it is about.
So they come in.
Oh, so they're giving us
Right.
Yeah, no, but if you wanted us to
back
Right. Sandwiches.
I like the
And so the distraction
potentially
without
go out and talk to them.
so there's already
So they're basically self-centered.
if I'm making an evaluation, like whether it's like money or whatever, jobs, good enough for me to my handwriting is
Like, I know
like get a future.
terrible.
For the ability, whether I'm hungry enough, do I have enough time to eat?
and then when I did this, they showed us how
Is it enough?
taking action on this metric is gets this number up by 5%.
So getting through the reaction.
Well, you have to think, like,
Is there a way? So does the AI we have now, this experience level, help us understand that?
like, already, I don't know, like, you already got so, like, you're a great customer, we're gonna keep you there, right? Yeah, we're giving you this because you already got more than because you got load of high bonus.
Thank you.
So we've also kind of focused on
Before your position.
A lot of times, there's 10 stores in the district. Nobody cares about stores that are ranked 4 to 7. The top 3 get praised, the bottom 3 get chewed out. It doesn't matter if you're number 4 or 7.
So it seems like one thing you can do is, if they've got, but they're already got more than they can do.
Yeah, so it was kind of like a
Stuff you want to
the idea was like, do you think
like
this
they're never
is
going to get
an
to
obstacle that's
the
too
but maybe it's a default instead of
So when you board thoughts that like, right, if you knew that your email upgrade was pretty good, one of the few, you might say, okay, I don't think this is the make it red, and sort of say like, but where you might say yes is like, okay, I think their gut reaction when we're talking to them about like their funeral is because we're really bad, so I'm gonna assume or something like that,
and then rewards on.
And the whole point is sort of identifying like, all right, what are the
Like, all right, we're going to try to do one bonus thing. The Snickers sales will do our sales go up 2%, and you get an extra Amazon gift or something like that. That sort of makes it, instead of like, hey, you have 20 things to do.
So none. Okay, yeah. There's none at this point. Okay. Or sometimes that I'm awake from none. Okay. Well, that's how I would say 80% of products will probably start there.
You'll get a whole star store.
How it should be. Right. What the path should be, but I'm not trying to say that. Okay, that's okay. That's 100% fine. But we came up with a pretty good place to do. Okay, cool. That's definitely gonna go for that. Okay, cool. That mentioned, we'll probably just like present for Is this something that you don't want to do? Okay, so I have, Steve doesn't have a framework for this, but have you ever heard of BJ Fogg? He's another behavioral scientist. Basically, he has two thoughts on how to make something harder to do and stop a behavior. One is to eliminate the trigger, so get rid of the
Where is the maximum
and if you can't do that, you need to make it a lot harder. The other one is his framework is about motivation, or the ability to beat a perception, but that one's probably the hardest.
They're competent,
so he actually suggests get rid of the trigger.
Right, and if you spend your energy on moving them,
Much more
bigger separation from those, where's the benefit?
Yeah, social media being like number one, right? Yeah. So that's
what a manager does.
Exactly. Right. And they're the ones he has a formula that says behavior is a formula
The one by the university being true is because the university goes on spring break, there just isn't a lot of beers.
Hey, we'll take 3 or 4 more minutes, and I forgot to mention that we'll go around and just each group can present for maybe 5 minutes about what they learned.
Well, let's at least talk through so I think the Q standpoint, I mean, I would say like making it the default, that at least a little piece of information is sort of double that and sort of make it visual.
Right, and the whole thing about this is getting that reaction to be, well, last time it wasn't a pie in the face. Right? No, it was the Girl Scout cookies.
Right.
So to make that experience, take action that you're already badge. Now my store has more badges than I'm after that. My boss or someone searching the stores shows up to my store with badges.
Even though stores 1, 2, and 3 are doing really well, they only got 3 badges. I'm down 4.
Well, I mean, I don't know what the compensation or margin is like for those guys, but it also seems like you could give them even a $10 starting is probably nothing compared to the potential profit, you know, for stuff. And that's, you know, because it doesn't have an answer to feel like an extra thing.
And like, how it also depends on how big the board is. If I get a Cooper on the way, I'm confident because it's on my house.
Or that they have the time.
That's not like stops or
I think you always feel good when you have a really good $2.
Stores are always dopamine for every
That's what something like,
It seems like it could be from a time there's so much craziness in the day. Like it might be just set aside to say like, okay, before your lunch break or after your lunch break, you get an extra 15 minutes to sort of like, you know, that you should be thinking about this so that, you know, because otherwise it's like, I can do it later, something else going on, there's, you know, yeah, right. You know, maybe prescribe it a time.
kind of like the Amazon thing. This recommendation, bad, and it's all gone tomorrow. So you want to act on it.
The other thing is looking at understanding when people are productive, right? And doing these particular kinds of activities.
That's a good point. Yeah, what time of day do they have some energy to do that?
Whatever. We have like 30 Yeah, I'm new. I've only been there a couple months, so I'm still learning all the products. That's cool.
And all the stuff I've been doing on Agile, I'm trying to understand how it fits into an organization, the difficulties organizations have about incorporating Agile. All these topics come out with just a different representation.
If you didn't get through everything, that's okay. We'll regroup
Did you get any reflections on your problem as we discussed this?
Yeah, so what we'll do now is actually, let me see, I think there were 6 groups, maybe 7. So if you can think about who you might want to appoint as kind of a spokesperson, we'll give maybe 2 minutes to each group. Tell us a little bit about what was the action you were trying to get someone to take and what were some of the discussions that you guys
Okay, so our challenge, Herschel's company uses artificial intelligence. I'm probably going to mess this up, but to work with local stores and help them help their store managers focus on the right metrics. So in the case of CVS, different stores sell different things. Some focus more, sell more prescriptions. Others sell more beer. They need to focus on different things. Right now, they use the same metrics they've always used, and they are getting access to new metrics that are more specific to their areas of opportunity. They're not necessarily paying attention to them. So that was kind of our challenge. So thinking about the store manager, the queue, they have a dashboard that they log into every day. Right now, the default is they see the old metrics first, and they kind of have to another click before they get to the new metrics. So one thought we had was sort of default to at least one of the new metrics, because another challenge is they've got like 20 things to do every day that they don't even get to that list, much less their new stuff. But maybe we pick one to kind of bump up to the top level and maybe highlight that as sort of their thing to their stretch goal.
from a reaction standpoint, I don't know that we've solved all of these things, but from a reaction standpoint, you know, they're super busy and they already are kind of overworked and don't necessarily have the time or energy to do anything extra. But, you know, we talked about different ways to motivate them, whether it's comparing them to their peers in other stores and how they're doing and how you could kind of catch up, as well as, you know, incentives that could be earning, as simple as earning a badge for your store, or, you know, something as simple as a $10 Starbucks gift certificate. I don't know that we really got into the evaluation, but in terms of ability and timing, again, going back to the fact that this is kind of an overworked, stretched thin group, maybe we set a certain time period in their day that we recommend that they look at this, you know, that right after lunch we're going to give you an extra 15 minutes and we really want you to focus on that stretch goal at that time. Another thing was sort of over the course of a month or a week, we say, you know, you have this many days left to earn this extra reward, and so do it now before you run out of time. And then from, I guess, the experience, we talked about making sure that it was positive, sort of giving them something achievable and starting with that small win, that badge or that Starbucks gift certificate, so that, hey, I did a little stretch, I did this extra thing, I got a little pat on the back or a badge or a cup of coffee, and so the next time one comes along, I'll be more apt to pay attention to it.
You guys want to go next?
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to bring up one thing that you brought up, which was a small win. So something to think about, especially for the first time you send that cue for an action you want them to take. If you don't get them that time, it's going to be a lot harder to get them the second cue or the third cue. So like think hard about creating a small win first to kind of build momentum, make it something really easy that you know they're going to respond well to, so that the next time the cues start coming, they'll be more likely to respond.
All right, so ours is on basically signing up for summer camps for kids, and this is a really interesting problem because it's a big problem that a lot of parents face. So going through the create action funnel, so with Q, one of the cues is kind of noticing about, starting to think about summer camps for kids. So this, yeah, sure. So one of the things is for the cues for this problem is thinking about having parents start thinking about summer camps for kids. And this is a challenge because, you know, a lot of summer camps, deadlines are as early as January, and summer is far away. So you have to really start thinking about how to market it properly. So really one of the big things to really think about was, as a potential improvement, is thinking about social proof, like finding other parents that are actually signing up for summer camps. And that's one great way to prime them, as well as marketing as well. But social proof can definitely help with this. The next thing is the reaction. One thing that we thought about was we needed to create a sense of urgency for the parents. So, and if they sign up now, then, you know, they get the best deal. Otherwise, the price will increase. And then the next thing is the evaluation. So we have to really think about, and we have to help parents, you know, doing the search process itself. The comparison shopping is going to be a bit challenging. So we have to make sure that they have to think a lot about the variables, such as the price, the content of the camp, and also like things like location as well too, and many other things. And so having some sort of interest quiz could help them with narrowing it down and creating recommendations. And then they also have to have the ability to do it. So besides having a website, it'd be nice to have like a mobile app as well, so that they can at least search for it and then, you know, conveniently sign up through there. And then there's also the timing. So having deadlines is very crucial, as well as, you know, letting people know about sales, because, you know, sales will definitely let them know that this is the right time to buy it. And then finally, there is the experience. So we have like parent reviews so that they can recommend it to other parents as well. So, but yeah, this is what we have.
One thing I'll say, just, you know, as you're thinking about the reaction, think about the gut emotional reaction as one of the key steps. That key step for you guys, it might be like actually joy. Oh my God, I can think about my kids not being in my house all day for the course of the summer. Or for some people, it might be like, oh no, I'm gonna be sad because I won't be able to see them as much, right? And that's probably one of the processes they're gonna go through.
Oh my God, that form.
Yeah, or the form, right?
Form, right? And have to remember all their meds or whatever.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
that's right. And then urgency, right? On summer camps, they might have. If you sign up by January, you get the early bird discount, right?
Let's do it. All right. Okay, so I guess since I was writing, now I have to do the I just had a pen. Okay, so we were talking about the potential for an app that it's a pending client or somebody just started working with. Yep. And so they were trying to figure out how to basically get patients to adapt their behavior to track their overall lifestyle. So medications, eating, exercise, any of the things that basically they're doing, like tracking their behavior so that doctors can then have the data, I think, to, right? Okay, so the Q was thinking about like an app that had some kind of reminder, like let's check on or come log all of your activities. And so, I don't know, we didn't really think a lot about, I guess, the obstacles for that initial cue. We kind of moved right into the reaction, right? Okay, so it felt kind of like if it's going to be happening all the time, a lot of it might feel kind of like it was nagging, or that it was a reminder of maybe a negative circumstance, if it's a chronic condition that somebody's continuously being reminded of this situation that they might be trying to avoid anyways. And then I did think of a positive one. They might feel a little bit of hope. This thing might actually give them some inspiration. So we were trying to think of things that might actually break away from that, but I don't know that we got that far. I think we were kind of pontificating through this a lot. When we were looking at the evaluations on cost and benefits, it was the time to actually do it. Maybe the feelings of guilt or anxiety if they weren't doing what they had been told, and then, kind of bringing a report card back to their doctor. I really did not do what you asked me to. And then the ability to act also had to do with the timing when, if you were out with people or what you were doing, and how easy is it to quantify, and then, any one of those behaviors, whether it's portion size or, I don't know. I mean, again, there was a lot of different pieces. It wasn't one specific action, but just how easy is it to put that information in there? Do you have time to do it? The urgency to act, we also felt like was a super challenge just because, you can put that off. I feel like you can put that off a lot. I'll just track it all later. It's not like the information you would put in there is going to change immediately if you don't put it in, but you will forget. But most people believe, I think, a little bit more. They have more faith in their memories than they should at all. I know I do. And then the experience of overall just kind of feeling like maybe you're not, feeling like you might be kind of failing that situation in general. And again, like setting up for a bad report card. So we had a lot of ideas through all of these things that I think we were trying to figure out which problems were being solved by this. And again, we didn't really go step by step with this, but I know we talked about maybe having kind of a scoring system like you were talking about with the, was it Hello Wallet? Yeah, the retirement stuff. So just trying to find the right way that shows that you're pretty on track. We were also trying to figure out some ways that might show that, like the quick wins. So it's really tough with a chronic condition because it's not like you're 5% cured. But trying to figure out which things, like, okay, well, if you are running, an example we came up with was talking about quitting smoking. I don't think they're going to be like, well, you're this many days, like less, or I don't know, you've got this many more days back to your life perhaps, but more so, okay, well, within the first 24 hours of not smoking, your heart rate does this or that. So trying to find things that are like, hey, you did make a positive choice, so let's reward you for coming and putting that information in there. It's just trying to find a way not to make it almost condemning or judgy when you're not doing it. So again, it's a little complex, and we did not solve all of this yet. But we're talking about buddy systems, so kind of like Fitbit, anything like that. And then we were wondering if, you could actually use some of those other things. It's good to track this stuff anyway. So maybe bringing in, they might not be fellow patients, but family members or people that are trying to support you anyway. So fostering kind of a collaborative, positive change, like a behavioral lifestyle change with your peers as it is.
If you had solved it all, I know some VCs that would give you $1,000 right now.
Well, that's why I'm actually not telling you. We figured it out. So, anything else, Dave?
Alright, nice job.
One thing, because I've heard it now a couple times, sometimes it is actually helpful to start with the action. This was the discover step in Steve's little spiral. It was the one that came right before this, but started thinking about what is the specific action you want people to take, and then use the create framework for understanding whether they were going to take that one action. So just as you were talking, you might get different emotional reactions to logging your food intake than you might on the medications or exercise or something like that, right? So I would say just start with the action that you want them to take, and that was one of the steps that kind of we didn't talk much about because it was a different part of the framework, and the create's intended to be about getting them to take that action. But
who wants to go next?
Okay, so we discussed about doing a kiosk. Camilo works on a kiosk, on a POS company. So our kiosk for entertainment. So if you are on a stadium and you need to buy food in the middle of a game. So the action, we thought about the action that it was basically making the buyer of the user get more food, do an upsell. So the cue was, or is having a dialogue or having something on the card that says, add an extra chocolate and get 50% off of that chocolate. Or get a soda for free if you tap. As emotional reaction, depending on what we decide to have as a prompt, will be a positive or a negative. Positive will be, oh yeah, that's a great deal. So I'm gonna get this. And a negative is if you're in a hurry and you really need to check out and there's something telling you add this. Think about your order when you already know that you want a beer and a hot dog. As an evaluation is like the money versus the product. Do I have the money to buy that? Or is the product good enough that it's gonna take my time and I really want that chocolate? That's a great deal. Ability is, do I have the money? Do I have actually time to drink that beer? I'm on a diet and I can't have the chocolate. As the timing is, the timing is urgent because you have to get the deal before you pay. Basically, you have the deal there, you have to take a decision. So it has to be quick. And the experience, we were discussing that the experience, it depends on the product, because if you got popcorn and the popcorn is really bad, you're probably never gonna do this again. But if maybe you got a beer and it was really good, you're gonna be like, oh yeah, next time I really, really wanna do this.
Nice, really good.
Alright, so we had a hard time picking something at first, so kind of just asked around the group, and kind of found wasn't common. I think kind of school education wasn't common, so we decided the action we wanted said person to take was, I guess, to complete an assignment or submit an assignment or homework. So the cue for that would probably be, you have to be in class, traditional classroom. Here the professor says something, so that's kind of an obstacle if you're not there. So potential improvement would be like a digital or some type of reminder. Emotional reaction, most people I think would say stressed. Maybe even, do I want to drop out? Could be, this spectrum there. So yes, I think there's pretty much an obstacle there. We were thinking maybe chunking up the work or estimated completion time to kind of get you to maybe realize that it's not that big of a commitment. Conscious evaluation of cost and benefit. Basically, I was going to ask a question about that. How do we know? How can we evaluate that? But evaluate the evaluation. But I guess we kind of went with what is the minimum to pass? Maybe, how much do I have to do to get this done and get points for it? So we were kind of thinking of improvement for that was maybe incentives or have some type of reward per thing you do. Ability to act, basically you need to be online. I think most homework is like online, either computer lab or online laptop. And that was an obstacle because sometimes you're not always have access to the internet. So maybe a way could be to post your pen and paper notes, upload that later, or maybe make a more mobile-friendly way to do your homework. Timing and urgency to act. There's always a deadline, so that kind of is a double-edged sword in the way that if you have enough time, you might procrastinate. If it's too soon, you might just give up. So maybe our audience is really motivated because we said self-paced. So that could be a way to maybe get rid of deadlines and make it more stress-free environment. And for experience, we didn't get to that. So I don't know if you want to add anything. But yeah, that was our quick exercise.
Yeah, nice job.
For ours, a lot of my work is focused on active transportation, and I specifically focus on like the physical infrastructure piece of it, but we really struggle with the behavioral side, basically just getting people to mode shift and consider either walking, biking, or taking transit. So one of the things we looked at, one of the most successful events that we have is Bike to Work Day. There's significantly more people biking to work on Bike to Work Day than any other day of the week. But obviously that doesn't translate into a behavioral shift. It's a one-time thing that people are clearly willing to consider doing it within the right conditions, but it's not something that they're going to want to do every day. So we talked a lot about things that we could change to make it more likely that people will consider making that a behavioral shift, or at least considering it more times than just outside of that one day. So the queue clearly is working for a certain set of people, so we want to focus on those people that we've already gotten. One of the things that we came up with was that in a lot of cities, this happens on a Friday. So it's great. There's Colin brought up, it's a great point that in a lot of cities, Friday is a casual dress code day. So you don't have to worry about biking in your work clothes or your work clothes getting wrinkly on your way there. But the downside of doing it on a Friday is that there's no attempt to do it the next day. I mean, you can't bike. I mean, you could bike on Saturday, but you don't have to go to work. So you're basically removing the opportunity for people to practice it 2 days in a row. So one of the things that we came up with was potentially trying to do it on a different day, so that people can do it 2 days in a row if they want to. Another thing we thought about was just the community aspects of it, that even if it's not necessarily someone that you're working with, but if it's someone that lives near you and works near you, you can bike with them together. So one, you're not out on the road alone, so there's sort of a safety in numbers feeling. There's the community aspect of it that may not be someone that you know, but someone that you can get to know through commuting with them. And then also, just it might be someone that knows the best route to go, so you don't have to think about it. You can just follow them, and it takes the stress out of knowing when you have to turn and knowing like what lane to be in, and you don't have to worry about like figuring that out on your own. Like someone's taking care of that piece for you. So if there's ways that we can keep that community going, either through like like a point system, or just highlighting that social component so that people are further incentivized to continue doing it. Anything else?
Yeah, it's really good. Yeah, nice job.
Hello everyone, my name is Joji, and we actually also had a little bit of struggle trying to figure out what type of project to base this on, but eventually settled on an app idea that I'm pivoting from original app idea I came up with, which was for a parking app, which basically kind of serves as a feeder for Uber and Lyft drivers. It's basically for people who live in the outer suburbs who tend to drive into the city and park in large parking structures, especially for big events, like anything at Irwin Center, fireworks, things like that. So, so basically the queue for customers to consider this service basically is their perception of parking and and the congestion and the fact that your car is idling for a really long time, and trying to figure out what their perception is of the time that they would save by using this service. So so I guess that was the cue. Reaction, couldn't really think of too much of a reaction. I mean, unless they have like frustration and anxiety with, assuming they have frustration and anxiety with like your typical parking use case when you're driving in from the suburbs. Evaluation, well, we would have to make the app and the service competitive price-wise with what parking costs. So parking costs like $10 for a particular event, or $15, $20. We would have to split that cost between both legs of the rideshare drivers, and we'd probably have to negotiate that with Uber and Lyft, because if it costs less to park in the city than what an Uber and Lyft driver can make in 2 trips, then they might not go for it. So it's kind of one of those negotiation type situations that you're going to deal with. So there's a cost consideration to that. And the ability, obviously, is the availability of this app, which is not available right now. So so that's ability. Timing. We put down convenience and speed. Is that what you mean in terms of the benefit, timing-wise, or I wasn't quite sure about that.
Timing is around, is it urgent for me right now to make the decision about whether I want to drive my car to this event or take an Uber or a Lyft? And so that if you email them 4 days before that event, they might be like, I'll worry about that later, when it's like 2 hours before the event or something, right?
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, but this is it's a transportation solution. It's one of human basic needs. So
Yeah.
there's not a lot of psychology. It's just people who use rideshare, who also own their own cars, who live on the outskirts. Those users might just use rideshare when they're in town trying to get around, but encouraging them to use it, when they're driving into town from wherever they're at, that's kind of a bit of a challenge. The good thing is, experience-wise, is that if they're already Uber and Lyft customers, they're familiar with that experience. So this is basically slightly modifying that behavior by not just hailing an Uber and driving directly into the city, but basically just driving your own car to the outskirts of the city and having an Uber pick you up from there. And outskirts, what I mean by that is a place that that doesn't charge for parking. Your off-street parking is free. So we basically have to map all of that out. But yeah, that's basically what we did ours on.
Okay. Nice. Nice job.
A lot of good ideas.
Yeah, so I hope that the intent behind that was to really just start applying it.
Sorry, is this okay? Yeah, and I'll just say a couple things. So one of the questions came up is like, how do you know how to fill something like this out? And to me, the reason that this is a very relevant topic in this community is that this is a very interdisciplinary idea, right? The reality is, user research, in my mind, is the answer to how you know, because those of you who've sat through some of these interviews would know, okay, within a few minutes, you would be able to gauge what their gut reaction was, right? If they're squinting when they look at your website, or if they laugh when they see something, like, you're gonna know what some of their gut reactions are, and then that's the moment to go prod and say, okay, you laughed, like, tell me more, what happened? And that's when you're gonna get into their head and start understanding, like, okay, this is how they're reacting just at that emotional level. And this is where analytics comes in, right? You might be able to track click-through rates and things like that. Marketing, I know you guys were talking a little bit about how it's really a marketing exercise, right? This is like, this concept spans everything. Usability, like, you might need to explain the concept of the parking app. Hey, you're gonna download this app, and what you need to do is drive to the outskirt location, and then an Uber and Lyft is gonna come pick you up. And that call to action, or that, asking them to take that action may elicit a different reaction than just ordering an Uber from your house and taking it all the way there, right? It's a different set, but you have to explain that to them because it's a new concept that maybe they hadn't heard of it. So it becomes a usability question, right, or a user experience design. And so it kind of envelops everything, and everyone on the team is probably involved in some capacity or another. The other thing I was just going to say is, like, you know, I think I would think of using the create funnel at the most granular or smallest action that you could imagine. A single click on an email would be an action that you'd want someone to take. If you're running Facebook ads and you want them to click through, like, that is, you use the create funnel there. If you need them to download a mobile app, think about the create funnel there, which is different from the create funnel for them to, like, take their first ride on Uber and things like that. So, like, think about it in as small of an action as you can imagine. And this is where this becomes complicated, right? If you think there's a funnel at each of the 5 actions, and then there's 5 steps within each one of those funnels, like, you can see why there's often a gap between what people say they want to do and then what they actually do, right? Because there's a lot of work that's involved, and oftentimes, and that's where the usability stuff comes into. So. You know, I didn't really have anything else left, but any final questions now that you had a chance to try the framework? And yeah.
I was just reflecting back on that people are motivated, they have their own modes of being motivated, right? People are either internally motivated or externally motivated. And so there's more dimensions as you peel back these layers, right? Of, oh, well, this group of people is externally motivated for this factor, but here's a different group that's internally motivated by it.
Yeah.
And how do you apply to both of them?
So part of it is, some of it might be a strategy question, which is, which group do I need to take the action in order for my business or organization to succeed? But some of it might also be the scale one, right? Which is, okay, this group is really small, the ones who are intrinsically motivated, but the externally motivated ones are big. You know, I was thinking about Bike to Work Day, and, like, you just think about the social proof there. You know who biked to work that day because you probably they walk into the office and they're sweaty, or they're talking about it, they go to lunch together, whatever. And that's you know, in my head, I'm like, that must be one of the reasons why Bike to Work Day is such a successful event, because it's a very much a visible thing that other people can see you doing as an action they saw you taking. And so I think the answer to about, like, well, how do you find these people and how do you know which ones are prioritized? It often comes down to, like, a little bit of a strategic question around the value, or, like, you know, maybe there's a revenue case around it or something like that. Yeah.
You alluded to the value of doing, like, A/B tests.
Yeah.
But then you also said that the first time you test out a queue is the second time you test out that same queue, if the experience wasn't good or they didn't take the queue, that it was much tougher the second time. So how do you reconcile those two things? A/B testing your ideas, but then also not using up your goodwill.
Your goodwill. Yeah, so one of the really tricky parts about A/B testing is that if you run enough of them, and at some point, it's impossible to track what the true experience was that someone got when they signed up. So what you'll often find is that sort of the analytical analysis often happens in what they call cohorts. And so they'll look at people who signed up for the product on the same day or within the same week or the same month, especially in an agile world where the product and the onboarding experience might be changing every 2 weeks. And so at some point, if it's important enough, and this is probably like maybe Facebook level user base, where you need to know, like, all right, who had what experience and how is that determining future behavior, because they were part of that experiment and we know that it failed, and now I need to remember that they are probably going to have a negative reaction here. I think when you're first starting out, it's probably less of a concern. And so the question around if you wanted to run an A/B test for your first queue, I would say you should, and you could. You just need to keep track of who was in which kind of arm of the test, and go look at some of the either qualitative or quantitative data around how they reacted and did they take the action, because it might inform how you structure the next test as well.
So now you've got an issue about repairing trust, right?
Sure.
Well, what he's saying is you have new people coming in every day. Most
Right.
programs, like, there's people who haven't seen it at all. You never hit 100% of the potential audience each time. But beyond that, you also often are testing before you even launch on a controlled audience or like a subset. So if you're trying to get people to do something at you go get a sample audience and test them. and you might completely screw up that audience, but you go on to, you know, you're trying to hit many more, so.
Yeah, I think the reality is like you might have lost those people anyways, whether they lost trust in you or not. Because if they didn't take the action, there might have been a million other reasons why they didn't. Actually, if you guys are interested in the idea of trust as you bring it up, it is definitely a behavioral concept. So I was actually just reading. There's an organization, Irrational Labs, that Dan Ariely out of Duke runs, and they put out a white paper on trust, and one of the key concepts is just being transparent and making it clear what your intent is. So if you guys remembered what happened when the news came out that Facebook ran all those experiments that actually they knew it was making people like more depressed or something like that, right? What did they do? They actually followed it up with a blog post, and they were like, this is how A/B testing works at Facebook. This is why we're testing all these things. And so they just came out and they owned it, right? And so they were very transparent about what they were doing and why they were doing it. And I think I don't remember if it's their behavioral science team, but I think it was, or their head of design basically like came out and wrote this blog post explaining what was happening and why they did it. So,
A quick question, there's a process question on queue versus response. Are those two separate things that you can manage as a product owner, or is the response a directly, you know, is the response just the consumer's response to your queue?
So yeah, so they are two different things, and you can manage them differently. And I think the thing to keep in mind, when I think of queue, I think very specifically about, usually it's a marketing message or some channel that you chose to try to encourage someone to take an action. So as an example, people might have a very different emotional reaction to a push notification that came while they were in the middle of lunch or an important meeting, and they didn't take that action than they might have if you had emailed them and they could have checked that email at night when they were done with their workday, right? So the push, and I'm just using these as examples, right? But the channel really matters, right? It's like very different to have a billboard on I-35 than it is to have like an email that goes to your user base. But like that's just one example where the reaction may be very different depending on sort of the queue, the type of queue you chose.
So the reaction might be, I mean, is the queue sort of the specific to the channel? Like queue is a notification, reaction is responding to, what is the text of that? Or
so the queue is the combination in my mind of the channel plus the message and a little bit about what are you asking them to do in that queue? What is that queue telling them? And if you're asking them to take the action, it might also be an emotional reaction to what the action is, right? So part of it's the channel, part of it's the message, and part of it's the action, and there's probably a lot of other things built in there. But the reaction is effectively for every email or direct piece of mail you ever open, or like getting your mailbox, like those are all cues that got you thinking about potentially taking an action, and so the reaction is related to each one individually. Was there a question back there? Yeah.
You went over a little bit about the context of like when you should use this, kind of at the beginning of the phase or maybe during the design phase. Do you have, I guess, recommendations of who is involved in that process?
Sure. So I would say the Create framework and this funnel in particular can be used at every phase of a product development lifecycle. Steve had a concept of like this understand phase at the top of the spiral. Sorry, it took me longer to bring this up now than it would to just explain it. But that is more around, do you, product development team, have a good understanding of how the line works, and the Create framework is a really good way to sort of internalize some of that. But then during the design process, whether it's thinking about the actual interface design or the marketing and all those things that feed into the user experience, the framework could then be used again for each of those individual actions that you want your users to be taking. So honestly, I'd say the most common use case would be that you're going to use it when you want to start building a new feature, or you want to iterate on something that you already have in your product, or you're going to launch a new marketing site where you're explaining a new program or product, and it's just it's in the works or something like that.
So do you run those? I guess, do you involve developers, project managers?
So that might be a little bit on the cultural side of things, of how who else is involved in, like, I would say take a typical feature or something at your organization and who's involved in that process, and that's probably the right starting group. The one group I would say sometimes does come in is marketing, because they may need to know kind of what are some learnings and what are the things that I should probably know about maybe as I start thinking about how to market this product in the future. Any other questions or thoughts? Okay, well, we'll figure out how to get the deck out to the meetup, and my email address is on the last slide, so if you guys have anything else afterwards, like, just shoot me know.
Yeah, so we are, thanks all for coming. Thanks to our guests. And as he mentioned, he's consulting, so he may have some availability if you have the right project. So we have to clean up the room on the way out, so please take any trash with you and arrange the chairs again. And again, thanks for your time and attention, and please spread the word.
This is great, Robin.
Good conversation.
Do you feel the need to keep this so all of
No, it's called. So that's really getting into the core issues around look for, I recommend to look for the fog behavior model.
Last device. There's 4 days.
Yeah. He has
So I think there's a couple different
got a lot of
things.
he has a broad right now.
So there's the enterprise buyer that's like someone would
yeah, got like 30 clients a year. 30 clients a year.
difficult?
Yeah.
To make it happen?
Well, yeah. So it's, what about you?
So I heard there's a company called
those got understanding of behavior. This is how behavior works. That's our mini course. That's great. And then we've got one that's how habits really work.
I'm only going to ask you about this some feedback. If it's interesting maybe turn it into a sales
another model. I have one.
First, just ask for feedback. Yeah, it's
no, my model is. I have several. I have
all it is a
feel free to model.
You pay like $60 for that.
Make sure whoever trying to take action feel. Essentially, we only act out feelings of. If you're in a perfect spot, then you don't like to do anything. So otherwise, if there's afraid of something because of this danger, then you're getting an emotional reaction. Exactly. So it's emotion that makes us act. Or you see an opportunity and then dopamine rises and excitement to find out what that thing is. And otherwise, you're in a calm, rested, restored stage. So how do you manage those emotions? Sure, there's emotions, not just in general, specific emotions you need to feel, think. How do you make sure they know what to do? Because that our ability to worse than we realize. And usually best is to distract, remove decisions, and tell them exactly what to do. The third is the do part. So many things where we feel like doing it, what we want to lose weight. We know what we need to go out exercising. Although to be honest, people don't believe that thing they do. But then they don't do it. So that moment is that they're destroying the ability to take action. So I even collapse that one step further into the emotional ROI model. It's essentially a tug of war.
there's this desire to do it and the reasons not to do it. And really they all come down to emotional reasons. You know, now that even when you're doing a cognitive evaluation, until it's translated into an emotional impulse, even if you like work through spreadsheets to do it, there's no action. We have people from a variety of reasons tell their emotional part basically broken, and they can't even choose because they'll list all the rational reasons one way or the other, whatever feels like the right thing to do. What happens is they just so
I thought about
so we already did my model here
let somebody else talk about
what
that.
are the reasons to what are the benefits you're going to get. Reminded them that they should come emotionally.
Cool. You've been doing this for a while?
Physically, it wasn't something materially and temporally over time. So mental, physical, emotional, so there's 6 factors.
Oh, cool.